Hello and welcome to another episode of Guitar and Pen, a songwriter's notebook. I'm Mark Will, author, songwriter, and publisher in permanent exile, currently based on the island of Taiwan. And I'm joined once again today by Craig Branch of the Can't Find My Way Home podcast. He's coming to us live from Germany. How are you today, Craig?
All good, thanks, Mark. It's nice to see you. It's been a while since we've caught up, so I'm looking forward to seeing what's in store today.
Yeah, what did we talk about before? We had the Smiths, The Queen is Dead. We reviewed that, and then we also talked about the Who's song Guitar and Pen, which is of course is the inspiration for the title of this particular podcast venture. So we're I should say, here for episode 5 of Guitar and Pen, our focus will be Roger Waters' Dark Side of the Moon Redux, which came out last year, and I'm only just now getting into it and reviewing it. I know we've been talking about
we talked about it when it came out, didn't we? Yeah. So I'm actually glad.
It's been a long time coming.
I know. Yeah. I'm actually glad we've waited for whatever convoluted series of reasons, but it's given me a different, without giving away too many spoilers, it's given me a different perspective on the music itself as well.
Yes. Well, here in this first slide, we're looking at the album cover, which is interesting. I mean, from this perspective, we just see some kind of animal.
I think it's his dog.
Well, we find that out later. It does seem to be a dog. I didn't know it was his dog, but that makes sense. But in the reflection of the eye, we can see the iconic image from the original Dark Side of the Moon, that prism with the rainbow colors. How would we describe that?
Storm Torgerson's masterpiece, maybe is one way to describe it.
The hypnosis guy, right? Yeah.
Through that prism and all that kind of
So I mean, what does this mean to you? Like, why do you think is it just a random image? He just decided to use this picture of his dog, or is there a deeper significance to this image that he's used for the cover art?
I think maybe like the original album itself has that striking artwork on it, just that kind of the sheer simplicity of it is its genius. Yeah, like many other things of that nature, it's just its simplicity tells you everything in that kind of short message. I think here's another example of it. It's just another talking point. It's simple, right? There's nothing really much to it. It's just as we see the animal's eye and the reflection of the old album cover in the pupil, or is it the iris? But anyway, you can see the pupil in there.
I was going to use one of those technical terms, but I wasn't sure which one. So
eyeball, maybe we can say that.
Yeah, the eyeball. You know, so it kind of reminds me. Well, it kind of reminds me of the repurposing of the Heroes album cover for Bowie's "The Next Day." You remember when that came out? I was listening to that again the other day. It's quite a good late Bowie album, you know. Like, I think I prefer that to Black Star, which I also like. But anyway, it's once I don't know. It's like the way these aging rock icons revisit their back catalogs and kind of repurpose them and reinterpret them. It's interesting. I don't know if we always love the results, but I don't know. We'll see what we think about it in this particular case.
I like the cover. I mean, I'm a dog person anyway, right? So what's not to like? So
right,
it's just that I don't know. It's a kind of. I think if we physically had a sleeve in front of us, like the record sleeve itself, you would also probably get a different feeling from it too. You know, just because of the size of it, and you give something tangible. But
Right.
as a talking point, I think it's unique. It's original. I've never seen anything like this before, like using that in this particular way. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, let's see as we go through the album if our thought about the cover changes in any way, or if we have new insights. Um, I was going to say something really important, but now I've forgotten what it is. Um, so let's move on. Okay, so why is this happening? Well, because it's 50 years since the release of the original Dark Side of the Moon, which was March 1st, 1973. And so, Dark Side of the Moon Redux, Roger Waters' version, came out last year, October 6th, 2023. What a date. I just realized that's one day before October 7th.
The other day,
Yeah, the next day.
the next day.
I didn't even notice that. But Waters himself, when something like this happens, you have to ask the question, why? Why do this? Why do this? And so he says it's a reimagining, a reinterpretation, an adjunct, a rallying point. It's more reflective. And then I guess his primary justification is we are still not yet breathing in the air. So he feels that even though the message of Darkseid has been with us for 50 years, it hasn't completely sunk in, or the world doesn't get it. But is that just a rationalization for a vanity project, as some have accused him of promoting?
Well, he's never really stopped self-promoting since the breakup of Pink Floyd, has he? I mean, in the court cases and the whole, I'm sure it cost him a lot of money going through the courts with the, was it, what were they fighting over, the name? Or anyway, basically the Pink Floyd name, I think they were fighting
Yeah,
over and stuff, yeah.
yeah, that
And
was the original,
so he's never
the
really,
original suit.
he's maybe never had the entire luxury of not working in that sense, right? But I suppose he could have, right? He's not going to go and drive a bus or become a postman or anything, right? He's not down on his luck, but
No, I think he's doing
I
fine.
think he's doing okay.
But he still has something to say, and we'll talk about that more in a minute,
It
maybe
reminded
in
some of
relation
these
to October 7th.
some of these things on the screen here, Mark. It reminded me that a bit more of I couldn't remember the name of it, but it was MTV Unplugged. As I've listened to the album a couple of times over the last 2 or 3 days,
Mm-hmm.
it just reminds me it's an album that sounds a little bit out of date. You know, it does sound for some whatever, not in a bad way. It just sounds like it's 30 years too late.
Mm. So he should have done it at the 20th
Yeah, I mean that's
anniversary.
what I thought. Right, I was just thinking there's something kind of strange here about that. Anyway, that's by the by. But that was just a kind of random thought that came into my head.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because to me, I think the original Dark Side, well, we know for sure it wouldn't have existed at all were it not for the precedent set by the Beatles, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. I mean, Waters has been open about the influence that had on him and Pink Floyd in general. The whole notion of the concept album, right? That basically started with Pepper, I guess you could say, although some have said like Frank Sinatra's In the Wee Small Hours was a kind of concept album. And I mean, of course, jazz guys were doing that, I guess. But in the rock world, Sergeant Pepper is really the first one, and this idea of like a whole album having a narrative. It's not just a collection of songs, but they're all linked together in a way, and they tell a story. So that's something to keep in mind as we discuss the individual tracks. But also for the Redux, I think the influence of uh, the band's music from Big Pink is significant. There's like this almost folk rock kind of influence. And Waters has talked about how that was an important album for him. I think he was friends with Levon Helm. Like Levon Helm toured with him maybe. So I can hear echoes of that in this reimagining of Dark Side for better or worse, So that's something maybe we can think about as we consider the individual tracks.
I went with a bit more jazzier overtones rather than folky or bluesier. I felt it was a bit more of a jazzier nature, especially as the album went on. But anyway, we'll come back to that.
Like in any particular jazz album or artist you can think of?
Not. I was thinking about that. Not really, but it was kind of a bit loose and a bit sloppy in places.
Right.
Not, as I was listening to one of your episodes about the Dylan album, you did not necessarily that sloppy, but, a bit looser.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in terms of production values, like, it's a world apart from the original Dark Side, which is one of the most, along with, like, say, Abbey Road, one of the most, legendary productions of any rock album ever, right? Like that's like the gold standard of rock music production. Dark Side of the Moon and Abbey Road, and I don't know what else is in that category.
This is when Alan Parsons and all these other assorted individuals were doing their magic as well. Glyn Johns was probably around at that time as well, and one or two other names who'll come in, and it was more about the actual man and music rather than man and machine and music. I mean, there was this kind of, it was like them actually. I mean, if we compare it to what we've got today, we can do just about anything today. You and I can do it in a heartbeat, if you pardon the pun, right. But does it really mean anything anymore?
Well, that's a depressing question to consider, when I think about my own efforts trying to promote my own compositions and recordings. It's quite a different world. But one thing about the Dark Side of the Moon Redux is that it has a home recording feel about it, which is also what music from Big Pink was. That was basically a home recording. So that, and Sergeant Pepper is like the polar opposite of that, just as Abbey Road and the original Dark Side would be. It's like very, very high production value, and as you say, this is the Redux version is a sloppier affair. For better or worse, there's some good things about it and some things that might make us wish for more production. But maybe we should consider this question from the outset. Team Waters or Team Gilmore? I'll let you answer first.
So, well, it's a bit like picking your favorite child or dog or whatever, since I don't have any kids, so I would have to go with the dog option. Musically Team Gilmore. Ethically or morally, probably Team Waters, I suppose. So I've got splinters on my backside for sitting on the fence in this one, I'm afraid, Mark. But yeah, it's not the easiest question to answer, man. There's a lot of depth in there. It's if you split it down into the personalities of the two individuals, I mean, David Gilmour seems very, for choice of a better word, introverted or quiet, the quiet one in the band, whereas Roger Waters is a complete polar opposite. Needs to be heard.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've told you before, in terms of their conflict, I'm 100% Team Waters, but
Mm.
I agree. It is unfortunate that, I mean, I've been mourning their conflict since 86 or 85, you know.
Right.
Yeah, something like that, like when I first started listening to them. So um more on that later, but yeah, just the whole conflict between um Waters and the Gilmore family, including Ms. Polly Sampson. I mean, she seems to me unhinged, and I think you shared with me the Rolling Stone interview with the man himself, and he's talking about, like, you know, Ukraine, and he smears Waters, calling him a Putin puppet, basically, and a Putin
Mm.
supporter, which is factually incorrect. Like, he's just, I don't know if he's just ignorant of it, or he's willfully, smearing him. But that's very disappointing.
Mm. I mean, I actually made a list. Do I have my list with me? No, I don't. It's somewhere else. But as we were going through this, I made a list of duos who hate each other, or band members who hate's maybe a strong word, but I suppose it's appropriate at this time, right? So we did Morrissey and Marr.
Oh, right.
There's Lindsey Buckingham and everyone else in Fleetwood Mac. There's
Yeah.
Lennon and McCartney. There's the
Yes.
Everly Brothers. I mean, I made a top 10 actually, and I don't know what I've done with my piece of paper, but anyway, there's some of the snippets from it. But I was making a little Simon and Garfunkel, I think they were on it as well, right? So
Joe Perry and uh, Steven
Steven
Tyler at
Tyler,
one point. Yeah. Uh, Jagger and Richards
right?
over the years. Yeah.
So I mean, is this any different? Is it just because they have such a kind of loyal and huge fan base that there is this kind of clear divisive line between what side of the fence you're on as a fan? Are you a fan? And when Roger Waters putting out this Redux version, it's some of the not even the reviews, the YouTube comments I was reading, I'm just
Yes.
like, this is shit. What the fuck is this? And you're just like, it was a bit kind of okay, reactionary, but I was like, it's a bit harsh, I was like, stop. Anyway, without getting into the kind of sound of the music, but some of it was just, I don't know. I just thought it was a bit over the top, but I mean, that's the nature of the world we live in these days. People spouting comments willy nilly, right? And kind of that's it. Once it's on the internet, it's out there. But
Yeah, well, we'll get into that um, a bit later, but I found myself, like, being influenced by the comments, and over analyzing things, and in a negative way. But then, that's not my deepest feeling about what he did. I'll explain more about that later. But uh, yeah, that kind of immediate, that's a new aspect of the listening experience. Just like I was gonna say, you mentioned earlier, the record sleeve, holding it, maybe reading lyrics on the back of it or inside. We don't have that experience now. It's like, I listen to this on Spotify and YouTube, and
yeah, me too.
it's interrupted with ads. We get a tiny little image of the artwork. It's like totally different experience.
Mm.
And we're like, instead of listening with our friends, taking drugs or drinking beer or whatever, or actually playing music ourselves, we're sharing the experience with all these anonymous people on YouTube that leave their unhinged comments. I mean, occasionally they're unhinged. Some of them are pretty funny, but and some of them are like, you know, heartfelt. There, people are moved by the experience. It was pretty much split, as far as I could tell. You know, among the or between the haters and the lovers, I guess you could say, or the fans. But yeah, more on that in a bit.
If I can ask you, musically, then, where would you be, Team Waters or Team Gilmour? Since Roger Waters thinks that everyone else in Pink Floyd was not an artist, that's what he said in a BBC interview. He said, "Well, they can't write lyrics for shit, so they're hopeless at it. So I'm the true artist." You know, that's what he
Well,
said.
he's definitely the idea man, and he's definitely the, you know, superior lyricist. But you know, musically, you can't discount any of the other guys. Certainly not Gilmour. Certainly not Rick Wright. Certainly not Nick Mason. I mean, if anything, they disparaged his musical
Hmm.
ability, or at least he claimed they did. But I've always thought he's an underrated bassist, and you know, he's a great songwriter, even though he didn't always like write all the best bits himself. But as a musician, I I don't know, is he their equal? Um, maybe not, but that's not his role, right? Like
It's like
Gilmour is the
the
guitar
other.
god.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's yeah, you're kind of elevating something into like a different stratosphere. But there was another, you know, on YouTube when it suggests videos on the sidebar, and it was weak links in otherwise great bands or something like the title for this videos was it. One of the pictures was Nick Mason, and I was just like, come on. It's like, really? That's how
I mean,
clickbaity can we get? You know, it was like, that's lame.
yeah, you know, they say the same thing about Ringo.
It's the Ringo joke, exactly, right?
Yeah, I mean, come on. You can't you can't discount his contributions. That's ignorant people talking.
Hmm.
But I mean, even though in like the current situation I'm Team Waters 100%, I'm still open to listening to the new Gilmour album. I've heard bits of it, but I think we plan to discuss it more in depth on the next episode. I hope we can still do that. I'm open to listening to it. You know, if he came to Taipei, I'd probably pay to go see him perform, even though I'm like disgusted and appalled by some of his comments,
Hmm.
recent comments, let's say. But anyway, one member of the band at least thought what Roger did was all right. Nick Mason, speaking to the NME, said of Dark Side of the Moon Redux, absolutely brilliant. Not anything that would be a spoiler for the original at all. An interesting add on to the thing. And that's where I am. I agree. You know, like all those people complaining, why would he do this? You ruin Dark Side. No, you can still listen to Dark
Right,
Side.
that's right, exactly.
It's still there. I mean, have you never heard of a cover song or a remix or a reinterpretation or whatever? You know, I mean, it's totally legit. If you don't like it, you don't like it. But I basically agree with Nick Mason. How about you?
Well, I think he's the master of diplomacy as well, right? So
Yeah.
he's diplomatic to the end. That's what I wrote in my notes. But I thought this is I don't think he's got any dogs in the fight, as it were, right between Roger and David Gilmour. So he's just like taking it for what it is, and he, he's probably right. You know, as you were saying, I don't think there's anything too deep to take from it because you can still go listen to, as you were saying, the original and or the remix of the original, the 30th year edition, or the whatever version of it you like.
Yeah.
And they're two separate things. It is exactly an interesting add-on.
But at the same time, we can't imagine Gilmour saying it's absolutely brilliant. That would never happen.
Well, where are the guitar solos, Mark? But maybe we'll come to that, right? So there's something missing from this album.
Well, that was a comment that, you know, a lot of the YouTube jokers made. Like, this song would kick ass if it had some killer guitar solos and some saxophone and some production. But let's get into the track by track analysis. I put tracks 1 and 2 together. And by the way, track 1, Speak to Me, is marked E on Spotify. E for explicit, because it has the F word. Come on now. That's the original Dark Side. I don't know if you noticed that, but that's another thing that what are we like?
I think we're just sanitizing everything within an inch of its life, you know.
I mean, what's with that? It's like a Bowdlerization of history, like, you know. I don't know if you noticed this, but the other day I posted something on this very YouTube channel. It was a thumbnail. We did an episode on one of my other podcasts, Texting. We did an episode on Gauguin's painting. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? And Tomek made the thumbnail, and he included like an image from one of Gauguin's paintings, which included one of the native Polynesian women topless, right?
Oh yeah,
you could see nipples. YouTube fucking pulled down my, just removed the thumbnail and gave me a warning. I mean, they didn't, as far as I can tell, they didn't give me a strike, but, you know, they did give me a warning. In the meantime, you can go watch Wet Ass Pussy, and, you know, there's one of our other friends pointed out that the girl who just banged 50 dudes has her video on YouTube playing for all the, you know, underage kids to see. And another one of my videos, Dystopian Theme Song, which had like images of war and police brutality.
Is this the original video with the wig?
Yes, for you know, the serious purpose of political commentary, that is age restricted. So you know they would never do that to one of the big channels, right? One of the money makers. It's just the little people like me that get throttled like that. But anyway, that's a sign of the times, I guess, right? Everything has to be safe. Oh, it's marked with an E. Be careful. You might hear one of the roadies interviewed on the original Dark Side say fucking mad or whatever it is he says, you know?
Because rockstars don't swear, Mark, so that's the...
It's so, like...
Or roadies, for that matter, right? So, yeah, it's not...
What is this world we're living in? But anyway, I've put Speak to Me and Breathe together because they, even though they're separate tracks on Spotify, on YouTube, they're actually put together in one video, and they, you know, one segues into the other. So Speak to Me is the heartbeat, also the overture. Waters says he learned this trick from classical composers, take bits and pieces from the whole piece and put them in the beginning. But basically the Speak to Me overture is the heartbeat. So this is where the narrative begins. It's like the beginning of life inside the womb, the heartbeat. You mentioned the the MTV Unplugged aesthetic. that's referenced here in this slide. And another thing a lot of people in the comments noted is that, oh, Roger Waters came out with an audio book, so that's why I've got the Audible icon. It's kind of like an audio book with cool sound effects and music.
Yeah, the jazzy overtones, if you like.
Yeah.
But there was so the first time I heard it, so this is probably about whenever it came out, a year ago, say, and I was just like, oh, right. I wasn't expecting it. It was just really, yeah, not what I was anticipating, or I didn't know what to anticipate then when I heard it. I was a bit maybe underwhelmed coming back to it a year later, a year older, definitely not a year wiser, because my birthday was a couple of days ago. I don't know, I had a completely different feeling to it. I was a bit more relaxed about it. I was less expectant of it. I just let, pardon the pun, but I just let the music play, right? And kind of just listened to it and went about whatever I was doing and got into it, and I took it for what it was, or what it is, rather.
Yeah. It's certainly, I mean, musically, it does have its moments. And lyrically, I like the fact that he referenced one of my favorite songs from Obscured by Clouds, which is a very much underrated album. I mean, it's one of my favorites. It's the album immediately before Dark Side. It's great. Obscured by Clouds. And the song Free For is kind of prophetic in that it's talking about the memories of a man in his old age or the deeds of a man in his prime. And it's so, that's so relevant to this, right? He wrote this when he was 29 going on 30, and then he's revisiting it when he's 79 going on 80. So it fits really well. I think it's a great start to this particular project, the reimagining of Darkside.
I'd actually written down, is it much of a reimagining listening to this track 1 and track 2? Because I was like, oh, it's kind of nothing that different yet. But, maybe this is the precursor to what's the appetizer, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, there's still the heartbeat of the drums, I guess. But the inclusion of Free For is what really caught my attention because that's I listened when it came out. I listened to that track at first because it came first, right? Like I wanted to listen to all the tracks in order, and so when I heard that, I immediately recognized the lyrics without having seen the track by track discussion that Waters posted. My second son sent it to me, and I'm like, oh, is that Free For? He's like, yep, because he's familiar with that album too, Obscured by Clouds. That was one of the best things I did as a parent, was introduce him to Pink Floyd. And when Waters went to Houston, I got tickets for both sons, so they had a great night.
Job done.
Seeing the Us and Them tour. But so Breathe, Waters describes as an old man's admonition to the newborn of the heartbeat, right? And I guess the key piece of advice or theme is don't be afraid to care, which comes up later in his discussion of what he calls empathy. That's not in the lyrics, but it is in Waters' explanation of the lyrics. So some of the key phrases for me are: life is a short, warm moment. And then there's the line about everyone's still on the run, which, leads us to track 3, but more on that in a minute. Any other comments about tracks 1 and 2? Like, how do you, like you were saying, you don't hear much difference between the original and the reimagining. When does it start to become like distinct in your mind or in your listening experience?
Well, definitely the next track. So that's really what it is, because there's more of Roger rather than the music.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to that then. On the Run. So this is where he narrates his dream. I mean, the original On the Run, it was also called the travel sequence, and it has that looping. I think it's a Moog synthesizer, but it's looping, and it's, I don't know, it's always reminded me, I think I often would like skip over this when I was listening. It's not like, I know it's part of the narrative, but musically it's
maybe one of the least interesting tracks musically, because you just have that, as you were saying, that looped. I think for those kind of people who enjoy that nerdy aspect of musical equipment and whatnot, the specifics, I think if you look up the documentary The Making of the Dark Side of the Moon, you'll find they name check whatever piece of equipment they used it on. It was one of the first sequencers, or one of the first synthesizers that had a sequencer on it, and they were playing around with it.
Yeah, and as I was listening to this again, I was thinking about, there are 10 tracks on this album. Like, several of them are just instrumental jerk-offs almost, like I would consider On the Run kind of like that. Of course, it fits into the narrative and it has its purpose, but like for a classic album, like how many of the 10 tracks are actual songs,
Well, it's the old phrase about all killer, no filler, right? So,
yeah.
Or is it? I think it's an interesting piece for the sake of it being musically different to everything else, and in the explanation about they were taking a lot of planes or touring a lot and things like that, and maybe back in the 70s as well, it wasn't the most safe experience or the most comfortable experience as you do now, where you can get on and off a plane without thinking twice about it. But there was maybe that
it's
aspect.
A Boeing.
Well, yes, unless it's a Boeing. Boeing aside, I think you mentioned there about the travel sequences, also a bit about the futile. This is where there's the interview when Roger Waters is talking about track by track of the Redux version, and he talks about the futile headlong rush for wealth and status, and it's also this kind of bit about, as we can see with Gregory Peck here, about the dichotomy of good and evil, or I'll let you take over.
Yeah, this dream, which he describes as a revelation. He says almost Patmosian, and this is a
whatever
reference
that means, right?
Yeah, whatever that means, he says. But what it does mean is like the actual book of Revelation, John the Revelator, who is thought to be John of Patmos, or John who wrote the book of Revelation on the island of Patmos. So this is like the apocalypse, it's an apocalyptic dream that he has. There's some character called the Wraith, and they're bad guys, and then at the end of the day, an Atticus Finch type character shouts, "Be gone," and like the evildoers, the bad guys, he calls them, are like vanquished. But I don't know, how does that fit into the narrative of on the run, which is, if we're thinking about like the timeline of the human life, this is I don't know what stage we're at. Do you remember that song by I think they were called the Godfathers? Birth, school, work, death. Do you remember that?
I don't know. Sounds fairly apt.
That's a great song. So I don't know. This is maybe work or school, work. Like you're already on the treadmill.
Mm.
You know, you're the rat, um, running around doing what needs to be done to get that piece of cheese. And I guess that.
What, as you mentioned earlier, he was 29 when they wrote it or recorded it or when the album came out. And he said he was waiting for whatever was supposed to happen. And then he had this realization that he's like, well, wait a minute, this is it, right? What we're doing now is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think the challenging this kind of misapprehension of youth as well when he talks about it in the interview. We're preparing for something, but we're not really sure what it is, and then there's this sudden realization that we're actually living it.
Yeah. How did you feel about the literary quality of the dream description? Like if we just read it without the musical accompaniment, would it be that effective? Would it be an effective short story or essay?
I don't know if the music. I don't know if the music contextualizes or helps contextualize it.
Yeah, hard to say. Not, I mean.
Is it the ramblings of a madman, Mark?
Right. That's the question. I mean, he would probably not be offended if someone said it was. He'd say, yeah, fair enough. That's what I just happened to be thinking this particular day. And I tell you what, as I was like listening to this, I realized that it's this aspect of Waters in particular that put me off of Pink Floyd for a while. Like when I met you, I was like in my not quite anti-Pink Floyd stage, but like I had been disillusioned. There's like a preachy kind of overly self-indulgent quality to some of Waters' stuff, like on, you know, the Final Cut, for example, which is often called like the first solo Waters album, even though it was a Pink Floyd album. Some people say The Wall is actually a solo Waters album, but whatever the case, like there was a period of time where I thought, you know, who does this guy think he is? Now I've changed my perspective on that because I now see him as like an Old Testament prophet, you know, like he says things that make us uncomfortable, but that's his role. So we have to take the good with the bad. We have to like make allowances for the things that make us uncomfortable or squeamish or even like
question ourselves.
Yeah, we feel cringy about hearing some of the personal revelations, you know, on the Final Cut, like if I showed you my dark side, what would you do? Like it's always accusatory. Would you sell my story to Rolling Stone? You know, it's like, okay, but like, what about you? Are you a saint or something? There's kind of a holier than thou attitude, which is off-putting, but you know, now I'm at a different stage where I love the final cut. Like I like it better than The Wall, actually, you know? Like I would prefer to listen to that than The Wall or Dark Side even, you know? So it's just these things go in cycles, I guess. But there is that kind of quality, like, of Roger being Roger that, you know, maybe you have to be in the right mood for it, or the a certain stage in life, or I don't know, need to have a certain mindset for it.
I think it's also normal, not quote unquote normal, to kind of either outgrow certain things, or, as you were saying, kind of just not. You've kind of had enough of them for a while, and you're just like, oh, this is just it's just annoying. It's just like background white noise, you know. You're just like, okay, I'll move on to something that makes me feel a bit happier or angrier or musically more interesting, whatever it might be. There might just be that kind of cut-off point when you think, all right, we're done. And then years later, whatever that might be, you come back to it with a slightly different mindset.
Yeah, true. Well, that leads us into Time, which I think elicited the most extreme of the YouTube comments that I read, at least. I mean, the people that didn't like it really fucking hated it. But then there were, you know, maybe half of the people whose comments I read who thought, you know, it was amazing, it's beautiful. Oh, this reinterpretation is so appropriate and fitting, you know. Oh, by the way, here we have a different view of the dog. The single release had a cover with a different perspective of the dog, different from the main cover, and also different from the Speak to Me, Breathe.
Was
cover.
Time the first single released from it, like the Redux version, or was it Money?
Probably. I'm not sure. Maybe it was Money, actually. Yeah, maybe it was Money. One joker on YouTube said, "Oh yeah, I mean this song made me realize that I was frittering and wasting the hours in an offhand way. I wasted 5 minutes listening to this shit."
Very observant.
To that effect. Yeah, yeah.
For me, though, like musically, I love the Hammond. I presume it's a Hammond, or the keys throughout the whole album. I thought they were really tastefully done. The drums, less so much, if that's even grammatically correct. I didn't really enjoy the drums at all. It got better as the album went on, but it reminded me of that phrase where you're sitting in a rehearsal room and you need a drummer, right? And everyone says, "Oh well, you can play a bit of drums. Why don't you kind of sit behind it?" It sounds like the guy who's played drums, or the people who played drums on this record, are that guy. You know, the person in the band who can kind of play a bit of drums. It's actually quite hard to play like that. It's so. Maybe that's what I meant earlier about being sloppy, but it's not that sloppy. I mean, it's not bad. It's just very. I mean, what kind of directions do you get from someone to say, okay, just don't play it like a real song, play it kind of very subdued and kind of laid, well, not even laid back, just played it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not Nick Mason, is it?
No. And I don't know, the drums kind of grew on me as the album goes on, but there's points in it where the fills don't really work, and it's a bit kind of half-arsed, and I'm just a bit like, it was just annoying. I love Time. Time's a great song. And yeah, when you're waiting for that bit for the guitar solo to come in, where it kind of does a little bit kind of like the aircraft engines just go, you know, the spaceship engines, and then you take me away, but it never really happens. But I don't think that's to its detriment. It's just a reimagining of it.
Well, this is one of the things, I agree with you about the organ throughout. I think he said it was some Southern preacher man guy that was playing like a gospel-y church organ type thing on the Hammond. the keys do sound good, but this is the first time I heard some of these other unique instruments. I don't know. At first I thought it was like a pedal steel or a lap
Yeah.
steel, but
Mm.
I think we might be hearing the theremin here. This, of course, is that weird instrument that the Beach Boys used on Good Vibrations,
Mm.
and we've heard it on I don't know what else, but
Episodes of
I
Star
think
Trek, probably.
yeah, it's like that spacey kind of alien type stuff. Which is, if that's whatever it is, I think it sounds good. I think it might be theremin, or I found this on Wikipedia. There's a Nepali instrument called the sarangi. So now we've got like the world music element of this, which this is this is the highlight for me. Like, I wish he had done more of this musically, like put more of these crazy exotic instruments on every track just to like give it more of its own
Mm.
personality. But I really like whatever it is I'm hearing. I should probably listen to like some YouTube clips of Sarangi like played solo, so I'll know what it sounds like. But supposedly it sounds like a human voice. So I don't know if we're hearing it on this track, or on one or more of the others, or several of them. But whatever it is, I wish there were more of that musically. I think that would have made like the album more powerful.
Mm.
Like it could have like helped to emphasize the lyrical content more by providing a stronger, musical backing.
I mean, I think you're right. It would have definitely added to make the musical palette, a bit more interesting as well and less conventional.
Yeah.
Whether it was on this album or one of his solo albums, it might have just been it. But that might also come down to where he was when he wrote this or reimagined this in his late 70s, and he thought, well, I know a guy that knows a guy that's got one of these lying around, so let's make it up and see what we can do with it.
Yeah. I just wish there were more of that. But as you're saying that, I'm thinking how also it's almost like he wanted to demystify Dark Side. Um, I read an interview with him, I think in the 80s, and he was talking about the influence of Bertolt Brecht.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you're familiar with him being in Germany and all, but he one of his Bertolt Brecht is a theater guy, playwright, and dramatist, founder of the Berliner Ensemble, and also like theoretician of epic theater. And what I remember Waters saying, this is how I learned about Brecht actually, from Waters mentioning him. Like a lot of the stuff they did in The Wall and so on was influenced by epic theater. And the idea is that there's an alienation effect, and the goal is to try to show all of the mechanisms behind the theatrical performance, so you can not be carried away by the drama, but you can analyze it critically, and especially from a social perspective. So it's like a de-romanticization, uh, as it were, or like a demystification. And I'm wondering if maybe like that's one of his motives. Like, okay, you've got this iconic so-called masterpiece. I'm gonna like pull all the guts out of it and show you like the skeletal narrative, so you have to like focus on the story and not be carried away by all
The bells and
the
whistles, as it were.
bells and whistles. Yeah, exactly. Like he strips it
Mm.
down, which, when you think of it that way, it's kind of admirable. It's like, okay, it's served its purpose in that sense. You still can go listen to all the bells and whistles and enjoy, and trip out to them or whatever.
Turn it up to 11, whatever you like, right?
Yeah. I mean, like if I'm gonna eat a pot brownie or some mushrooms or take some ayahuasca or something, I'd probably rather listen to the original. But this is kind of like I don't know, it's almost like Plastic Ono Band, right? To take another to refer to another touchstone. It's like all of the production values of the Beatles were stripped away, and you just have this very simple homemade record, or even the first McCartney solo album, right? That's a home recording too. So I can't say it's bad, like it has its place, and there's room in the world for all of that, everything, right? Let 1,000 flowers bloom, as Mao would say.
Did you find that the song itself, Matt, did you find that similar in sound to the original? I mean, did you find it that much of a reimagining, out with the maybe one or two exotic instruments that we talked about, but did you find it that really that different to it?
Well, of course, you don't have all the clock ambient sounds, which that's a big part of the original, right? But yeah, I mean, I know what to expect, right? I guess one of the most glaring omissions is the amazing guitar solos, of course, but it still feels like time, still feels like that.
I mean, on the other hand, musically, as we were saying, he was 79 when he put this project together. So maybe he's not in that space for all those other things. This is the way he wants it to sound. He wants it to be where he is at that particular moment in time, and in his own head.
And it does sound like that, it does sound like an old man's version, it certainly doesn't rock as hard, but that's okay if you're in the mood for it. I don't know, as we're going through this, I'm the most, like, the strongest idea or feeling I have about it is that it's a demystification of the original, and he's just stripping everything away and trying to get people to focus on the narrative, which, maybe in that sense he was successful, because I went back and looked at some of the original lyrics, and I realized I didn't know them as well as I thought I did, right? Like
I find a lot of Pink Floyd lyrics are kind of an afterthought, to be honest. And
because the
not
music
all of them.
is so...
Yeah, right, exactly.
Because the music is like at the forefront, and also, vocally,
they're quite quiet.
Yeah.
Higher register as well. I mean, the voice in this record is definitely not. It's a much lower register. It's right up and close to the microphone, or so it seems, where you get that more intimate reaction to it. But with the original stuff, the voices do sound a bit more ethereal, or a bit more spooky, if I can use a kind of more normal word. But there's a kind of certain haunting element to the sound, the original.
There's something literally dark about this dark side.
Indeed.
I was gonna say, like, sometimes I have trouble distinguishing between the voices of Gilmour and Waters in their prime. Like, sometimes I'm not even sure. Like, you can always tell Lennon and McCartney who's singing, right? Or George, right? But sometimes with Waters and Gilmore, I have to look it up. Like, I think that's Gilmore, but could it be Waters? You know, like, it's not always clear. And so maybe that's, and maybe it's due to the mixing or whatever, but it's like the vocals are, I mean, Gilmore is a more expressive singer than Waters most of the time, although not always. But they both, it's like the vocal parts are almost an afterthought, you know? It's like the least important element musically, apart from the background vocals with all those amazing female singers, right? But like the lead vocals, even if it's like a double lead, it's almost like, I don't know, standard. There's not like it's almost like basic bitch vocals, I hate to say. You know.
Well, if we talk about vocals, and move on to the next track in a second or two, of course, where it's where it's there are none, or are there? But it reminded me of this bit where there was what was it? Yeah, so it was an interview I was reading, and Roger Waters, I think I mentioned it earlier, Roger Waters was talking about how he was adamant that because the others didn't write lyrics or couldn't write any good lyrics, therefore they were not as true artists as he was, and that kind of thing. Whereas you and I have just spent the last 4 or 5 minutes talking about, are the lyrics really the kind of primary thing when we listen to Pink Floyd, or Roger Waters in this case?
Yeah, I mean, as a songwriter, I have to say the lyrics are, or should be, all important, you know. And especially as like a Dylan fanatic, or Lennon McCartney, or any great songwriter, you know, Leonard Cohen, Tom Waits, Bowie's not he's not in the same class as those as a lyricist, in my opinion. I mean, sometimes he has his moments, but yeah, like, you know, maybe this is kind of a revenge project. It's like, you're gonna hear my lyrics for the first time, motherfuckers. That's we're gonna strip away,
take it or leave it. You know, it's
like
that
it
kind
or
of
not. Yeah. You're gonna focus on the narrative, and we often forget that, you know, track 4, Time, ends with a reprise of basically the first track, apart from the overture and Heartbeat, Breathe. You know, we come back to Breathe, so there's another kind of classical.
Well, you're at the midway point of the record.
Yeah.
So, time to pause and reflect.
It's not without precedent, though, because, you know, side 2 of Abbey Road did similar things with all those repeated themes, you know. But yeah, let's move on to track 5, The Great Gig in the Sky. On Spotify, this is just Great Gig in the Sky, no the. I don't know what that's about, but in terms of the narrative timeline, I should say, like, previously we had a callback to On the Run. No one told you when to run. So this is what we were talking about before. He realized, like, this is it. Your life has already begun. There's no future. You're living it now, right? Be here now. But it's like at this point in the narrative, halfway through, he pauses to reflect on the possibility of an afterlife, which is interesting because, as he never tires of telling us, he's an atheist. He doesn't believe in an afterlife. He thinks, like, death is a dreamless sleep and the end of consciousness. So and then he, you know, he's made comments about organized religion, the tolling of the bells and the magic spells mentioned in, I think, the first breathe, the original breathe before the reprise. So what about this? Why does this occur at the halfway point, or like the end of the original side one?
Not an easy question to answer, right? Maybe if we could talk about, maybe I could get there in a minute, but maybe we talk about the images on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
If we start there, and that might help a bit. Let's take the voice
emoji.
I was going to say that's obviously my go-to one, but let's break the mold and let's talk about what's not really on this track, or maybe compare the original to this one, and the picture here of Claire Torrey, and that's maybe a good starting point.
Absolutely, that's a glaring omission. But of course, how could he include something like that on this project? Like, he sure as hell ain't gonna sing it. And if he has those female backing singers he works with now. I think they're called the Songbirds or something. I don't remember. It's like sisters. But they could do something like that. But then he's just like repeating the unrepeatable, because that's like a performance which was improvised, and that kind of vocalizing, you can't duplicate that. That's like,
what was that? I read something about Gilmour was in charge of the sessions, or he was running the sessions, and he said, can you kind of express some emotions rather than words? She's like, I'll try. And I mean, what you get, I mean, it's very reminiscent of like Mary Clayton on Gimme Shelter for different reasons, but it's such an iconic vocal piece that you're just like, no one knows who there's a great documentary called something about background singers, 12 feet from stardom or something it was called, but it's all about these like Mary Clayton and the background people in the background, then they get a minute in the limelight, then they're gone again. It's that kind of that kind of thing. Claire Torrey's another one. I read that she took them to court. I don't know if she took Roger Waters to court or Pink Floyd as a company to get her, because I think they paid her 30 quid, which is what, the equivalent of £500 or something today for her session. That was the kind of standard working rate for the day, or whatever. I think it was one day she worked.
That's a tricky thing, because as a songwriter myself, trying to complete my own projects, I don't have a band. I hire musicians to work with me, and I just pay them a flat rate. And what if one of my songs blew up and made me millions of dollars? Ha ha. But conceivably, right? Like, one of the musicians who, like, the things they contribute are like, they wrote those parts. I'm thinking mostly of like guitar parts, right? Like, sometimes I write the riff, but sometimes the guitarists I work with come up with riffs that make the song 1,000 times better, right? Like, I didn't write it.
You give them some ideas or a starting place, and then let them roll with it.
Yeah. So, and that's, sometimes the contribution is more like, I don't know, integral to the song than would be expected. Like, of course, in this case, like, her contribution is the song. I mean, Rick Wright, I guess, had the chords, but, she made the song with that crazy improvised performance, which is unlike anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I can remember the first time many years ago, in my first visit to Amsterdam, my buddy and I, who I went with, I was either 19 or 20 at the time, and we stayed above a place in Amsterdam called the Pink Floyd Coffee Shop. It was either above
Mm.
us, we stayed above it in a hostel, or it was across the street. And in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
that's what you wore. They played Pink Floyd very early in the morning. They just opened the windows, and you had this kind of morning alarm, and it was unique. I'll say that much. But that was the first time I think I can remember hearing it that loud, like not in
Mm.
someone's living room or a car stereo or something like that, or a cassette. It was very, very loud.
It's really, I was listening to the original, in preparation for this broadcast. And it's really, I didn't realize before how wild it is. Like she is like
As it goes
unleashed.
on,
It's not,
it goes on. It's
yeah.
just that it gets more and
She's
more.
like a banshee or something, It's not like, at times it sounds like an operatic, um, I don't know, prima donna, like a, I don't know, a Jesse Norman, or fill in the blank with your favorite soprano or whatever, right? Of that caliber of, um,
Maria Callas or someone like that.
yeah, someone like that, right? At times, but then she just, there are moments when she's just like off the chain, but that's what makes it so
Mm.
great, right? It's very, it has that virtuosity, but it's also like very rock and roll, and like, I don't know, you have you heard the Ray Charles song, Nighttime is the Right Time? Like the background singers on that, they're like, uh you know uh Dionysian, like Bacchic, wild women, Banshees is amazing. It's like the most incredible thing you've ever heard from a female voice. So that there's that quality, and that's what makes the song. So
Mm.
there's no way he could duplicate that. And so instead, he's got this story about his buddy, the poet Donald Hall,
Well, apparently
whom
he only
I've
met
never read.
twice. Apparently he
Yeah,
only met
that's
him
what it
twice. It
sounds
was
like.
a kind of very strange, maybe not a strange friendship, but a strange introduction to. I'd never heard of Donald Hall either, but he was the poet laureate, I believe.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'd heard his name, I think, but I've never read his stuff. But yeah, this one of the YouTube comments, or several of them, described this as self-indulgent crap. So I don't know. This is where,
Maybe people can say that about the original as well. If you're in such a frame of mind, because you just think, what is this? Why am I listening to this? And what is she? Anyway, not
yeah,
me, but I'm sure other people listen to think this is just rubbish.
yeah. I mean, similar to the endless looping of On the Run. It's like, yeah. What did I say earlier? It's like musical jerk off, but I mean, it's an incredible performance, no doubt about that. The original, I mean,
Mm.
but with the Redux, we've got this story. I guess the important part is there is only one road, meaning one life to live, I guess.
I mean, for me, the Great Gig in the Sky is about death, but as they talk about him and the interviewer talk about the possibility of an afterlife in one of the interviews, and oh, but you've got it on the screen here. I can't see it for looking at it. Right? Sorry, but yeah, there
Yeah,
was this because that's the exact same notes that I have, right? So, but that put me off now, right? But I think it's an interesting meeting with this Donald Hall, and his relationship with him was quite unique in the sense that they didn't really meet a lot, or they only met once or twice. They hit it off. He read his books. I think one of the books he mentions was called essays after 80.
Yeah.
So I haven't really got into what the content about these, what his work was about. So I can't really say one way or the other. But he seems like well, you can see by the picture of him here, he looks like an interesting kind of guy, Donald.
Well, he's got, for those of you that are just listening, in the slide, he's wearing his tie-dyed peace symbol shirt, so I guess he's the hippie poet laureate. I think he's from New England, so maybe he's up there in the woods of Vermont or someplace, living on a farm, doing some LSD with wavy gravy, or maybe he was visited by the Grateful Dead or something. But yeah, I guess maybe I should probably read at least one of his poems so I know what the hell he's on about. But there's only one road, which I guess is relevant when we go to side 2. Although if we're listening on Spotify, there is no side 2, but or a CD, there's no side 2. But the way Waters describes track 6, Money, the iconic Money, is that it's about being at the crossroads. Are you going to choose avarice or love? Love or money? So there's only one road. You've got to go one way or the other. That reminds me of a Led Zeppelin song. There are 2 paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. There's only one road.
Maybe you could tell us what you mean by the heavyweight in the pictures that you've chosen.
Well, this is here's another long free verse narrative that overlays. I mean, he's using and singing some of the Money lyrics. Although is he singing? He's kind of like Tom Waitsing it, or
audio
Leonard
speaking,
Cohening
singing. Yes, right. Yeah, exactly.
Which I mean, I have to say I kind of like. It gives it that darker, kind of grittier quality.
More menacing. I wrote. There's a kind of certain kind of element of fear in the performance. I would say as well.
Yeah, but he like the spoken word part refers to this poem. He described it as a poem in that track by track analysis. As he described it as a poem. The heavyweight. I don't know what it is. Is he referring to? I mean, it's a heavyweight who made a deal with the devil, made a Faustian pact with the devil, right? He became the champion of the world, but he gave up his soul. Same old story, which, reminds us, since we're talking about crossroads, it reminds us of Robert Johnson, who allegedly, became a guitar blues man virtuoso by making a deal with the devil. But the heavyweight, he was a bit coy about it. He said maybe someone knows who that's about. Is it Gilmore? Is he talking about that conflict, or is there something else?
I think in a heavyweight contest, I think Rogers sees himself as more the pound for pound champion than David Gilmour, than his nemesis David Gilmour, I would say.
So he's talking about himself?
Well, possibly. He's definitely a contender, but definitely not the heavyweight, I would say.
Well, maybe we can research that and put something about it in the show notes. Or is anyone out there in the live stream? Maybe you can send us a message. Tell us what you think. We've got another view of the dog. The artwork for this shows the dog's nose, so it's like we're getting pieces of the puzzle. In the video for this, we definitely see the dog, even the tongue. I don't know if you watched the video, the lyric video.
Yeah, when I heard this the first time, I thought, oh God, yeah, I wasn't I was underwhelmed. Right? Let's say that. So this is like a year ago, and I was just like, oh man, what's going on? And I don't know. Maybe I wasn't listening to it in the right way or at the right time or whatever I was doing at the time. I was just like, it was getting in the way. It was an annoyance. But as I was saying at the beginning there, having revisited it more over the last few days, it's not an album I'm going to listen to regularly in that sense. But if it comes on again and it's in the background, or I'm doing something, or you're out for a walk, or whatever old guys do these days, then it's definitely an accompaniment to that, I would say. But my first listening to it, or when I heard it, I was just like, oh, it was a bit cringy. Yeah, I didn't get it. I didn't like money. Now, I have problems with money anyway, literally and metaphorically, of course. So is it in 7/8, the timing?
Yeah.
The time signature. So, and you're just kind of like, all right, I don't know. It's just kind of iconic and annoying at the same time, And it also reminds me of an old British sitcom called Are You Being Served, where the intro...
Oh, I know.
So, you're right. So it's the intro that... I don't know if that came before. Probably came after the album, but yeah.
I think so.
They stole it.
You're talking about the...
Mrs. Slocum and her pussy. Yeah, right. Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's all sorts of things about money. It's not one of my favourite Floyd tracks, I'll be honest. I don't...
Oh, you're talking about the cash register sound.
The cash register, yeah.
Right. I thought you meant musically. That I remember the theme song.
Oh no, that's it. That is it. Yeah, you're on the money.
Yeah, you may be surprised that I know about that, but a lot of British sitcoms were shown on PBS in the States, which is Public Broadcasting Service. Now it's Pentagon Broadcasting Service, but at the time that American TV fare is vulgar, but those Brits, they're so cultured, with their fucking Are You Being Served and Allo, remember that show?
Yes, I mean, we can be here on a whole other episode of transatlantic cultural adventures.
I'll tell you another one. What is it with Ms. Bucket? Keeping Up Appearances, right?
Oh yes,
remember
Hyacinth
that one?
Bouquet. Yes,
Hyacinth Bucket. Yeah. But also they showed like Faulty Towers, so it was a great thing because that wasn't available anywhere else on American TV.
So maybe that's my kind of background with the song itself. The original, I was always a bit ambivalent about it. I kind of liked it, and then there's other times that I just play it forward or skip on to the next track. I was just like, it kind of annoyed me. But I guess that's just me. Me and my four bars my 4 beat to the bar, it's kind of, that's my...
Well, I've always loved the bass riff, and I mean, that's all Waters, right? Like, he wrote it, so fair play to him there. I mean, it's definitely a unique composition.
Yeah, and the way the vocal line goes with it as well. Da, da, da. I mean, it follows the bass pattern, or it follows the riff, and it's quite... Maybe you just need a spliff to kind of enjoy it a bit more. Maybe that's my problem. Maybe you just need a bit more lubricant of some sorts to help you through that.
Well, I really love the end of it, when on the original, it's the guitar solo, but the bass is doing something really interesting too,
It's a great saxophone solo, isn't it?
And I think that's emphasized in this version too. Like, I enjoyed the new version musically as well. But I'm with you. Like, the first impression was not what I was expecting.
This might be more challenging. No, me too, actually. But
yeah,
I had thoughts of this might be a long 50 minutes or so.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to what Waters himself describes as the essential idea. We're talking about track 7, Us and Them. This is my favorite. This may be my favorite Pink Floyd song. But the essential idea is empathy, like loving your brothers and sisters regardless of ethnicity, sexuality, nationality. Nationality, in fact, is what he calls the enemy. Well, I think that's more to do with the next track, but certainly this is about the stupidity of war, the idea that, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. At the same time, he talks about the defeat of good and evil and the bad guys in, On the Run. So those terms are kind of always shifting. Like, what about the us and them of warmongers and non-warmongers, right? Like, that kind of conflict and class warfare is something he would probably support, but maybe not like on the actual battlefield with weaponry and so on. In his interview, he talks about how empathy should be coupled with the welfare state. I think our libertarian friends might object to that. They'd say the welfare state actually causes the warfare state, and like they're two sides of the same coin. But, his idea is that, and he's talked about this many times, like the reason his father died, right? It all goes back to his father, right? He's got daddy issues because his father died. He was a pacifist, but then he joined the army to fight the Nazis and fascism. He died, and then the promise of the post-war dream was destroyed by Thatcher, and there was this is one of the major themes of the Final Cut, and it's beautifully expressed there. Like, whatever happened to the post-war dream? Like, Maggie, what have we done, right? Like, she gutted the social safety net.
Well, she was the milk snatcher, amongst many other things.
Yeah. So that's where he's coming from when he's talking about the welfare state. But I'm just thinking about like our American libertarian friends, who many of them are like staunchly anti-war, and they're some of the most powerful voices, but their solutions to the problems are different from like, from lefties like Waters. So that's just a side note. But the most important thing about Us and Them, musically, is, of course, we're looking at a picture of the great Rick Wright, who wrote the chords for Us and Them. Actually, when they were doing the soundtrack to a movie, which I don't know if it was used, if this piece was used in the movie, but Waters asked for the chords so he could write Us and Them, and the result is legendary. One of the best Pink Floyd songs, one of the greatest songs of all time, in my opinion. Masterpiece.
I think Rick Wright's probably one of the one that we don't talk about in the band. Like, people talk about the drummer as in the sense that, well, it's that, as we were saying, the Ringo effect, but Rick Wright seems to may have been the glue that held things together a lot of the time as well. So yeah. I know he was good friends with David Gilmour and Nick Mason, as far as I know, but his relation, he get fired from the Wall.
Yes.
If I remember rightly, right? There was something, I can't remember how it came about, but an acrimonious parting of the ways, and then he was fired during the recording of it. I can't remember exactly, but there's in this interview, Roger Waters talks about him fondly, but
there's an ugly history there, and probably Waters is somewhat to blame. I don't know. I've heard stories about him during the recording of the Wall. He had conflicts with Bob Ezrin, the producer, and some of them were over money. like points, the points system, like no points Ezrin. He even like wore a badge, NPE, no points Ezrin, or I don't know what that was all about. So he could be pretty prickly, and probably there were some ugly things even from his side that occurred. But I know that on one of those albums, like he was not even, he played on one of them, and he was like a guest musician.
Right.
Like,
I mean, there was all sorts of kind of
he's a
really
founding
shitty
member.
right,
yeah. How could that be?
Yeah, it was kind of bizarre, like, I found.
Kind of like what Black Sabbath did to old
to Bill.
Bill, yeah.
I mean, I think his Rick writes as we're looking at the image on the screen here, his playing's wonderfully underplayed. You know, he's a very tasteful player. He did what the song required, but also gave it that certain magic lift to make it sound like Floyd as well. You know, that sound that we've come to know and love anyway. Well, as well as Gilmour's guitar, I would say. I think his is an equal part to it.
Oh yeah, I mean, just imagine them as an exclusively guitar-based band. You know,
I can't really see them as a Motorhead trio or the Hendrix Experience or something.
No, like Cream or something. No way. Yeah. You got like the atmosphere provided by the keys. That is the Pink Floyd sound, you know. It's like the Doors without Ray Manzarek, but even more so maybe. Have you ever heard the Rick Wright solo album? I don't know if he did more than one, but it's actually pretty good. I played it for my second son, and he's like, "What is this shit?" I like it. He didn't like it, but I think it's nice. It sounds like Floyd. There are some songs about sailing. He was just as Gilmour liked flying, Rick Wright liked sailing, yachting, maybe boating. I don't know. Some nice, colorful textures and just pleasant. Not overwhelming, not deep, but just like simple pleasures of life, Has like you can imagine yourself like out on the Mediterranean sailing and listening to this.
As one does,
As one does, yeah. With all our free time.
And yachts, of course.
And yachts, yeah. Well, I've also got an image of the Pink Floyd Momentary Lapse of Reason tour, because that's the one and only time I saw Pink Floyd. Of course, that was post Waters. But we went up to Houston. I would have been 16, maybe. And, I had a religious experience during Us and Them. Of course, I was aided by certain
additives,
entheogens, certain substances, but I mean, it was just a thing of beauty, right? And it sounded just like the record. Waters wasn't there, but they didn't need him live. He had already done his bit writing the lyrics, and
off he went.
Yeah. Does he sing? Who's singing on Us and Them?
David Gilmour.
It's Gilmour, so maybe Waters sings some background, or I don't know, but so he's not needed for the live performance. But it was just a beautiful, beautiful experience in my young life. Like I had other. I guess you could say spiritual. It was a spiritual experience. I mean, it really was like that. I had similar experiences, just listening to the records, but when I heard it live, is such a beautiful, moving thing. So
a lot of these later uh, concerts and so on. I'm trying to think what it was called. The film version, was it Delhi? No. From this tour, I think they released the one in Venice. I think it is. That's maybe like the video version I had of it, because I think it was on
Okay.
TV and I'd recorded it. I think it was in St. Peter's Square in Venice. And
Okay. Is that the one called Pulse?
so that's later. So this is where I was getting my kind of things a wee bit cross, my wires
Okay.
crossed a bit. Pulse came
Mm-hmm.
later because the CD just had that red pulse on the back of the spine
I
for
see.
whatever reason. I never bought it. But anyway, I never got to see them.
Oh
But
no.
I
Okay.
enjoyed, I did enjoy their concerts. I must.
Have you seen the Pompeii
Yeah,
concert? That's a pretty amazing
I mean
film.
that is a bit of a head rush as well.
Yeah.
It's just kind of what is
Yeah.
going on here. It's a bit mad for the time,
They're out in that
especially.
amphitheater with their
Yeah,
shirts off,
looking very,
rocking out.
looking very like they haven't had a bath for a while and kind of stuff. They're just kind of
Well,
an
Gilmore
interesting look.
certainly Gilmore certainly looks different, doesn't he?
Yeah. I mean, they look so young as well. I think that's one of the things we
Yeah.
haven't really talked about in the two albums anyway, is when I think Roger Waters might have been the oldest of the quartet, or
Mm.
a couple of years older than them. So Gilmore and Rick Wright and Nick Mason would have been in their mid-20s when they wrote That Side of the Moon.
Mm.
I mean, musically, I think what they were doing at the time, but maybe we'll save that till the end then, because you're going to ask me a question at the end.
Okay. Well, oh, what else did I want to say about this? Something so important, it would have blown your mind, but I've already forgotten. Let's see if
We can agree that us and them on the Redux version's pretty good. I quite like it.
yeah, yeah. I like it. Sure.
I mean, it's not a
Um
bastardization of the original in any way at all.
no,
I think it's a nice
musically
addition to it.
musically nothing stands out. The original, I'm thinking of the piano solo, which is amazing. I think there's some nice keys on the Redux too,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, so that's a yeah, it's a good track. I know what I
So
was gonna say. This tour that I've referenced, right, the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour, that was the tour after what has to be the worst Pink Floyd album. Wouldn't you agree? Like, is there one worse than Momentary Lapse of Reason? It's pretty bad.
well,
I don't know.
it sounds a bit
At the
bloated
time,
as well, you know.
yeah, at the time, just because it was, oh wow, I'm alive when a new Pink Floyd album
Mm.
is released, because I had heard all the old stuff, right, and then that came out, so I was thrilled and delighted. But I mean, I listened to it again maybe 10 years ago, and it's like, God, that is terrible. The Dogs of War is all right. Learning
Solo,
to Fly,
Living the Flies are, well, I don't know. I think it's an album of its time. I don't mind it. I don't think
to
it's not a
me, it's
classic. It's not a classic. It's not
no,
anywhere close to creatively anything like the others that we've talked about today. But it's
no,
just,
not at
it's a
all.
kind. It's almost like a bit of an afterthought. It's like we've got some ideas. Let's make a record.
Let's show Roger we don't need him.
Mm.
But yeah, I don't know how successful they were with that. But I think um, the Division Bell is a great album. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say.
And that's that kind of answers the critics, I think, right? Like that's totally post Waters, no involvement at all. Waters himself trashed it. I think wrongly so. I think it's great. I really
Well,
like it.
like the momentary lapse of reason thing seemed a bit much like a lot of music at that time, just a bit vacuous, and it was all a bit, yeah, fair enough, right? It was, if I remember rightly, so we were getting into the kind of early house music and uh, techno and all of that stuff. So I mean, this was like the contrast. You could either go back and listen to the new Floyd stuff, or you could go and listen to this nonsense with DJs and all that other kind of malarkey. And I don't know, what's a guy described to me Robert Cray as kind of coffee table blues, and this is a coffee table album, like Delicate Sound of Thunder.
Hmm. Oh, The Delicate Sound of Thunder. That's the name of the
no,
tour.
Sorry. This is, the momentary lapses we're talking about, excuse me.
Yeah.
It was just all a bit beige and a bit, the yuppie era was among us and all that.
And that phrase, we're getting off track here, but who cares? Momentary lapse of reason, that comes from the song One Slip. One slip and down the hole we fall. Is that what the lyrics are? Anyway,
I'll be honest, I haven't revisited those albums for a while. It's been a while.
It's pretty underwhelming, as we've said, to use the word we used earlier. Dogs of War, okay, that's good. That's good. But the rest of it,
all filler, no killer. If I can use the opposite of before.
Yeah. Dogs of War is pretty killer, and that was good live too, but yeah, the rest is pretty much filler. All right. But as we say, the Division Bell, well worth the price of admission. All right, on to track 8, Any Color, with the U for you American listeners and viewers. COLOUR, the British spelling. Any color you like. This comes from, this phrase was like a throwaway line from one of the roadies who said, any color you like, they're all blue. So.
I was talking about cables or
I guess.
some kind of equipment needs. In the interview, he goes into a bit more detail. Roger, what was that? That goes into a bit more detail about this, as you mentioned earlier, about flags, and it's a bit kind of, I'm a bit confused. So on one hand, he's saying, the flags are a bad thing, but then we should we should all be under the rainbow flag, and I'm like, well, which one is it, man?
Yeah, exactly. There is that contradiction, and I know what he means. He's like, we should all be tolerant, but the rainbow flag itself has become political and is like a divisive element, right? It's like that you can easily see how these flags become oppressive and they divide people rather than unite people. I'm sympathetic to the sentiment, right? Like, don't discriminate against people for their choices or their sexuality. But once you have a flag, it's like it becomes a kind of rallying cry, which is used to divide one group of people from any kind of flag. Once you have a flag, you've already got us and them. You're already dividing one group from another. So that's something that I don't know. I wonder how he's probably aware of that contradiction and would contextualize it. But I had the same thought as you. Like, there's a kind of inconsistency there, and it's like, well, which is it? What do you mean?
He also talks about the blue and yellow, the Ukraine, the red.
Right.
Is it Russia or is it black? And then he gets all a bit philosophical.
Well, the black flag is now flying over Syria, apparently. So,
the
with
other image
U.S.
on the screen,
support.
well,
Yeah,
as
well,
always, right? You know.
the other image, of course, is my shameless self-promotion. If we're going to be talking about flags, well, we've got to talk about my song Residence from an album you may be familiar with, No Cure for the Princess Disease, and its remix, which has still not been released, although it's been leaked on YouTube, but No Cure for the Princess Disease or its mutant viral strains. That's the remix with all those Pink Floyd type keyboards, basically. But if you want the raw original, you can see the video of Residence, which includes the lyrics, "The flag that you embrace is the flag that you erase." So maybe we should erase all of these flags, blue and yellow, red, black, even rainbow, because they just divide us and, create these dichotomies of us and them.
People do lose their shit about flags. I mean, it's kind of, there's the Bill Hicks joke about, oh, yeah, I'm really bad at remembering Bill Hicks jokes or jokes in general, but Bill Hicks does a fine bit in his stand-up routine about flags and burning them.
Oh,
I would go and check the burning of flags. I would go and check that out. It's
let me make a note.
I'm not going to ruin. I ruin enough things. So let's
find the clip and put it in the show notes. Hicks on flags. Yeah. Someone was mentioning Hicks today. Who was it? Jimmy Dore, maybe? Kurt Metzger? It's like he was talking. It was during the first Iraq war. He's like, yeah, the Iraqi army is the fourth best army in the world, but there's quite a big drop off from the third to the fourth best army in the world. Yeah, it doesn't translate so well. Maybe I better include
we'll leave the jokes
to
the funny guys, man. And maybe we're kind of funny in our own way.
Yeah. Okay, so I was gonna explain it, but no, let's not explain the joke. Not. All right, so track 9 is Dane Bramage, which I think this line at the beginning in the spoken word part, why don't we re-record Dark Side of the Moon? Yeah, that is a pretty harebrained notion, but that's exactly what he did.
But it's an interesting use of re-record it. I mean, did they re-record? I say they. Did he re-record That Side of the Moon? In a way, yes, but in a way, no.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he, in his words, he reimagined it. So
right, that must be real then.
There was recording, so I guess it's fair enough to say that he re-recorded it.
I don't know if I told you, a few years ago there was the Pink Floyd exhibition was here in Dortmund. This must have been the year before COVID, so what, the end of 1999, maybe beginning of 2000, and my wife and I, Unjin, went to it. A student of mine bought me tickets for it, so that was very nice of him. And Unjin had or has no idea about Pink Floyd, especially, so I was explaining a little bit about this and that. And we get, on the screen, we should say there's a picture of Syd Barrett. So I explained to her about who Syd Barrett was and why that he's not in the band anymore. And then she was reading, or she was listening to whatever, the bit about his psychedelic experiences, and she was quite surprised. She's like, really, this really happened? You know, it was a bit like the Peter Green thing, you know, when it was all just that LSD moment or mind-bending, and it was that was it, never the same again.
There's got to be something else there, you know. It's not just the substance. Like, he had schizophrenic tendencies or whatever. Peter Green as well, but and he probably also did too much. On the other hand, Ozzy Osbourne claims he did acid every day for like 10 years. Of course, he's pretty fucked up, so maybe there's something to it, but
that's
at least
how they
he
stay
can
so
function.
slim as well, Mark, right? All these guys manage to stay in great shape because, well, they don't eat anything. They just take lots of drugs, and therefore you don't need to eat, you know?
Yeah.
How do you look so... How does Lemmy look, or how did Lemmy look so skinny? Easy.
Well, this picture of Sid, the lunatic, on the grass, and that, you know, that's one thing we didn't necessarily emphasize so far, but one of the great themes of Dark Side of the Moon, of course, is insanity, like madness, right? Like that's also part of this life that's all one road, you know, like there's madness mixed into it, and you know, that's also
trying to make sense of the madness,
or trying to make sense of the madness of life. Maybe it's life itself, which is the madness, or life in human society, and it makes us all mad.
I think this sounds really great on the album too. From a musical point of view, I quite liked it. Yeah, I was like, this is I think by this point in time, I was ready to separate us and them, right? So I'd made that distinction between That Side of the Moon and here's the Redux version, and whatever headspace of, if I could use that phrase, I was in to listen to this reimagining version of it. I was okay with it. I was like, yeah, this is actually quite good.
Yeah, it's good. I'm just looking at Sid's Telecaster in the background there, the one with those
chunky, doesn't it?
With the mirrors on it, you know. Have you seen him playing that one live? Maybe the time he put all that hair gel in his hair, and the lights like caused it to basically melt, and it was streaming down his face in a live TV appearance, and he just stood there strumming chords randomly and not singing, and the rest of them were like, what the fuck's going on here? Have you heard the Syd Barrett solo albums?
If I'm being honest, not for many years. I mean, it's just a thing that I kind of maybe dip my toes in and out of, and yeah, that was it.
The Madcap Laughs.
The Madcap Laughs, yeah.
That's pretty good. I mean, it has its moments, right? But apparently during the recording of that, musicians would say, like, what key is this in, Sid? And he'd say, that's funny. And then they'd just start playing. Roll tape, you know. What key is it in, Sid?
It's a bit of a punk ethic, Mark, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the fucking Shags, whom I've recently been learning about. That's a story for another day, but
the other thing I would mention about this version of it anyway, I think by the time we're getting near the end of the album, Roger Waters really sounds his age in this, vocally in this version of it as well. I mean, whether that's part of a natural thing because he is 80, but also in the other point where it's kind of the end of the piece, and he's put all his effort and energy and his spirit into it, and this is, you know, him coming out the other side of it, you know, in that performance. But it did remind me a bit of, as we mentioned earlier, Leonard Cohen, or a bit Tom Waitsy, or it's hard not to, because he is more or less doing a kind of spoken word performance.
There's that quality on several of these tracks. I'm seeing some notes in the live stream. Oh, it's Tomac. Tomac says, what up, fellas? Pompeii, 1999, the year before COVID. No, we meant 2019, Tomac, but thanks for the comment. You were talking about the exhibition.
Yeah.
Of course you meant 2019.
But I think I went. Oh, anyway.
Tomac. Oh, Tomac, you jest. Okay, so that's how this works. Now I know how to do live stream chat. All right. So anyway, yeah, so the other image here is the grass, right? The lunatic on the grass. So here is the quadrangle at Cambridge. I've never been there myself. Have you?
No. They won't let Scottish people in, man.
Yeah, that's right.
It's far too posh.
Right. Yeah, well, this reminds me of like the video of what's the track from the Division Bell, the wonderful track actually. The grass was greener.
That's a good song.
Yeah. What's that song called? I forget the title.
Has it not got the bells in it? Is that not the one when the bells?
Yeah, it has the bells. Yeah. Oh, that's bothering me. The Division Bell. Let's look it up quickly. Why can't we? We're on a live stream. Who cares? The Division Bell single. What's it called? What is it? Is it the Division Bell? That's not the name of the song. I'm looking it up. Here it is. High Hopes, right? Yeah, that's it. High Hopes. All right, anyway. Enough nonsense. Let's get serious. So, yes, it's good. It's a good track. It redeems the project for you. And then that leads us to the finale, Eclipse, which ends with this interesting line in the Redux version. It's not all dark, is it? Which is the reverse of what the original says, right? One of those roadies that's interviewed says it's all dark, isn't it? There is no dark side. It's all dark.
There was something about he left a bunch of cards out in the Abbey Road studio, and he wrote some questions down on them, and whoever was around at that time wrote their own answers, and I think or maybe they spoke them into a mic. But yeah, that might have been it.
Well, they tried to interview McCartney and Paul and Linda McCartney, but their answers were too like polished,
fluffy,
and they so they didn't use those. But the roadies gave the good.
I think he responses. Got it right.
But I think on the original it says it's all dark, but he kind of flips it, dark. Which is it's an interesting twist on. And I had to look this up when I was listening on Spotify. It sounded like he was repeating that it's all dark, isn't it? That's what I thought he said, but actually it seems he's saying it's not all dark, is it? So there's kind of a hopeful message there.
Or is it? It's the kind of...
He asked what album we're talking about. You mean right now? This is Roger Waters' Dark Side of the Moon Redux. It's his reimagining of the original Dark Side. Earlier we were mentioning also the Division Bell, but the main focus of this live stream for the first time ever is Roger Waters' Dark Side of the Moon Redux. Anyway, sorry, what were you saying, Craig?
I can't see these messages probably just as well.
Oh, yeah, no, you can't see them?
I think I might just have to press whatever button up here, but
okay.
I'm probably better not touching. And I think if it's working, what do they say? If it's not broke, they'll fix it. So
you might disappear.
Yeah. The as an end, or as the last song on the album, I think he's done a great job actually of keeping it not necessarily the same, but with the same kind of sentiment in it. Maybe here with a little kind of lyrical twist to it, but I think it sounds I was quite happy when it got to the end, not because I wanted it to finish, but because it ended on a nice musical note as well. I think it sounded really good. Some of the other earlier songs are a bit more challenging to get into musically, or you have to listen to his voice. And if you don't really, I mean, you have to really have to listen to his voice. And if you're not really in the mood for it, you're kind of like, but as we get towards the end here, I think he has a bit more to say. As in, it's not all dark, is it? And in the interview we were talking about earlier, he's re-emphasizing this bit about the avarice and greed earlier that we were talking about, or love and avarice. What was it again earlier? The crossroads.
At the crossroads, avarice or greed, avarice or, basically love or money. Or sorry, avarice or love, that's the choice at the crossroads. Yeah. So love or money.
And I think in the interview here as well, he goes into a little more detail about, can we not all stop just being dicks for a while and kind of,
love one another,
he says,
and he says, if you're a warmonger, stop being a fucking warmonger, right?
Just so you can get a bigger slice of the cake, and
yes.
Then he goes into a little bit about when you could be smelling the roses, and there's some kind of interesting bits.
Yeah, breathing in the air.
Breathing in the air, exactly.
I mean, that's like you condemn the us and them dichotomy, but at the same time you're condemning the warmongers, and rightly so, right? Like that's not the way to live one's life as a warmonger. Not like, of course we can't recommend that. Oh, I think Tomek's leaving. He says he went punting down the River Cam last summer, and that was in the image of the quadrangle. So that's awesome. I would love to do that. Yeah, but again, there's that contradiction, and it is contextual, right? Like sometimes the us and them, like, may be a necessary stage to pass through. Like, you just can't allow it to destroy your soul. You have to still keep your eyes on the prize of, empathy, and, even if you're in conflict with someone, you can still empathize and try to minimize the conflict and end the conflict as soon as possible, while, engaging in it for the sake of justice or whatever, right? Like, we can't just allow ourselves to be steamrolled by the big boys or by the elites. Yeah, the machine. So of course resistance is necessary, but at the same time we should have a kind of empathy, I guess. Which
again is a bit ironic from him not really seeing eye to eye with his ex-bandmate and co-collaborator for many years. But I guess that's the personal nature of things, isn't it, when we talk about personal relationships or things of a bigger nature?
Yeah.
You can't always practice what you preach, I suppose.
Yeah, but it's also understandable when you consider the influence that Gilmore's wife has over him, apparently. That's that would be pretty off-putting and galling. Okay, so we've completed our track-by-track analysis. What lessons have we learned? Because one of the purposes of this podcast venture, Guitar and Pen, is to ask ourselves, what do we learn from whatever song or album or book? We haven't reviewed a book, but we could. There's some great rock bios, but what do we learn as songwriters, musicians, producers, or even audiophiles, listeners, appreciators of music? What are your thoughts on that?
Take songwriters first. I'll just give you a few thoughts. I just wrote down one or two things. So from a songwriting perspective, experimentation, especially if we talk about Pink Floyd as a band who were pioneers of that particular musical genre, back in the late 60s and early 70s especially, that experimentation even today is still a good thing musically. Roger Waters is doing it again, if you want to put it that way. So he's reimagining his ideas, his lyrical ideas anyway, as well as musical. I think reimagining things is still quite cool. I think it's still okay to do that. I mean, I don't see the problem in, I don't think it's a lack of ideas. I think it's just another way of expressing what you've done previously and where you are now as a songwriter. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. If you take it from the other point of view as a listener, as we said earlier, we have this kind of divisive audience or listenership who are either, well, fuck this, there's no guitar solo in it, right? So it's, you've got that, or you've got the ones who might want to sit with a glass of whiskey and a cigar and just have it on a kind of certain volume and enjoy it for what it is. You know?
There's an us and them nature to the YouTube
absolutely
commentary. So yeah, let's try to empathize and find common ground. In addition to reimagining, we talked about repurposing old material, just as Bowie did with the Next Day project, I like that idea too, like cannibalizing oneself as a composer, revisiting previous material and finding like new resonances, like the way he repurposed Free 4. I love that. I think that's one of the
it's probably
big
something he's been
takeaways for
wanting.
me.
Sorry to interrupt. It's probably a thing he's been waiting to do since he wrote it. Just never had the right timing to do it, or the right whatever project he was working on to fit it in or to do it justice.
Well, it's prophetic. I mean, it's amazing he wrote that that was before Dark Side, so he would have been even younger than 29. Maybe he's 27, 28, whatever. I mean, there's a prophetic quality, right? Like, how did he have the wisdom of old age at such a young age? And before that, he wrote those beautiful lines in Echoes, which he references in interviews these days as well. Like, I'll have to look up those lines, but it's, it's like two strangers meet and I am you and you are me, or something like that. So the whole idea of empathy was there almost from the beginning when he started writing, when he took over the songwriting duties from Sid after he checked out, right? Like someone had to write the song, so that lot fell to Roger, and that was one of his first lyrical ideas, this notion of empathy. And it's an almost like Vedic Hindu notion of the self, right? Like there is no distinction between I and you, I and thou, as it were, right? Like we are all one. These distinctions of us and them are artificial, and really we're a unity, even though on a certain plane we, it's absurd to say I am you, you are me, but spiritually there is that connection. So I love how these old ideas are revisited and repurposed and, given new significance.
I mean, we've seen it with Johnny Cash through the whole American recordings of, I think I'm right, what it was called. Leonard Cohen did something, I think, for his last album because he physically couldn't record it otherwise, so he kind of had to. I think he was just quite ill at the time, but whatever was going on, he couldn't get to a studio to do it. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, that was Darker Moments or something it was called. I forget.
But You Want It Dark? Isn't that what it's called?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So the other thing I would add about from a listener perspective, because I guess we have an audience, or definitely you have, that side of the moon is still out there for everyone to enjoy. So I think that's without doubt, right? So if you don't want to listen to this, or you don't see any value in it, or you're just going to complain after the first 10 minutes because it's boring, right? Maybe there's a lot of it's just boring, but go listen to That Side of the Moon, knock your socks off, you'll love it, right? So great. But I think Redux is a different beast altogether, and it's probably one thing we haven't talked about is probably ego driven.
Hmm. Well, that's certainly the charge that the detractors levy
I don't see the
or
problem with
level
that. Yeah, I
against
don't
it.
really see the problem with that as an artist, as a musician, as someone who has something to say, whether it's reimagined, reinterpreted, recycled, or whatever. I mean, it's just this. He's got a platform, and this is what He's chosen to do it, or how to do it.
Exactly. Exactly. He can, right? He's doing it because he can. He had the idea and it's like, why not? So let him do it, you know?
Hmm.
It's not, as we often say on the texting podcast, it's not either or, it's both and. You still have your original.
Oh, exactly. So
Enjoy. But
exactly, it doesn't. This version doesn't ruin the original for me.
not at all. No way.
And I think what's the only other kind of note that I made in the full sentence way anyway was what's the point of making a near replica of the original?
That there would be no point. That
Right.
would
So
be
when you
absurd.
going through certain comments or you just skimming your way through them, you're just like, well, what are these people expecting?
Yeah.
I mean, I was just
At,
that I found that a bit perplexing.
yeah, that's
I'm
kind
being
of an
polite,
absurd. Yeah, it's an absurd criticism, but they're entitled to their opinion. I would
Hmm.
just say though at the same time there are things I wish he had done musically, like one of the lessons in previous episodes is um wave your freak flag high, like do go ahead, take chances that you wouldn't normally take, but like go all the way. I wish he had gone more in on that exotic instrumentation, like the Nepali sarangi and more theremin. Some people want more cowbell. I want more theremin, and like I think he could have done more to enhance it musically, but that wasn't his purpose. I just personally would like something more adventurous musically, because if you're going to reimagine it, then like go all out. But
Speaking of
yeah.
reimagining, right? Just as we kind of get near the end of this, U2 released an album. Was it this year? They reimagined a whole. I don't know if it was a whole album they reimagined or a back catalogue they
Oh.
reimagined. And I only listened to one song, and it's very, very, very bad. So,
Oh, I well,
so it's
the
like
original was probably
bonus.
bad too.
It's well, no pun intended, right? So yeah, Bono. If you could transpose Bono's voice instead of Roger Waters, you're just like, oh God, cringy. So maybe this is a current thing then. Maybe this is also a particular period in an artist's life, as Roger Waters knows that he's not going to be here for that much longer, right? He's 80 years old, so you know, comes to his old, but there comes a chapter in an artist's life where you think, well, maybe it'd be fun to do something like that as well, and to kind of really explore different things that new challenges I never thought about when I was younger, or I was too busy chasing something else, as he talks about in this interview as well. Chasing that
Those
thing called life.
those 80 years you mentioned, 80 years. What does he say? 80 years at most, or even less. Well, he's gotten more than 80. Luckily, um, Okay, we've got a message here from the chat. Ego driven versus what? I'm aiming to rebrand either or as neither nor. Stay tuned. Okay, fair enough. But that's either or is the flip side of neither nor. But ego driven versus what? I mean, I think the point is, well, you're saying, so what? It's ego driven, meaning he's doing it because he can, right? Like he has the ability to do it. He had the idea, so why not? I mean, that's like for us with our particular financial situations or whatever, it's not maybe as convenient to undertake what you could describe as a vanity project like that. Maybe not as easy to do, but if he's able to and it's ego driven, okay. I mean, it still has its validity. I'm glad he did it, like I like having this different perspective. It caused me to go back and listen to the original again, focus more on the lyrics. I don't love every choice he made aesthetically, but that's okay.
I can live with it. The U2 album is called Songs of Surrender, and I surrendered a very long time.
Oh.
There was a white flag in my corner anyway. I think I listened to one song and that was enough.
Didn't they have an album called Songs of Innocence and Experience as well?
Yeah, right. So it is. Yeah. Anyway.
That was the iPad or
the album no one wanted.
iPod bug. Yeah, right.
Delete this from I'm getting free music.
I've got a bug. I've got
there's a fly in
virus. Oh. I've got a virus called U2. Yeah. All right. So yeah, I think we've gleaned enough lessons from this. Next on Guitar and Pen will be the Rivals' latest release. That is David Gilmour's Luck and Strange. So that should be interesting. I'll have to listen to that before we start talking about it, but maybe sometime during this holiday break we can reconvene and have another stream and talk about.
We're all about the live streaming now, Mark. Now we know how it works. Right?
Now, yeah, I'm liking it.
We've fumbled our way into it, and now they can't get enough.
Yeah, and it's recording at the same time, so we have a video and a live stream. All right, so yeah, that'll be next. Everyone, please remember to subscribe to my newsletter. That's Mark Will Write, WRITE.substack.com. This is streaming on YouTube and will be posted on YouTube at Mark Will Write, WRITE. So be sure to subscribe and help us monetize this channel in 2025. Anything you want to promote besides the Can't Find My Way Home podcast?
No, that's a good place to start. There's loads of interviews there, or on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. There's loads. All the episodes are there. There's nearly 80 odd episodes there. So yeah, go dip your toes in the water. See what you find. With your good self, of course, man. That's a good place to start.
Oh yeah, there is. Yeah. Well, I'll put some of those links in the show notes. And this has been Guitar and Pen, episode number 5. We'll try to release a few more of these in the coming year, more than we did this past year. I've been focused mostly on my other podcast, Texting, but we'll see what 2025, the year of the snake, looks like. And we'll try to do some more Guitar and Pen episodes, so I hope you'll come back. Maybe we can do a series. I've been thinking about a Bowie series, so maybe you can join me for that after we do the Gilmour. Yeah. How about some Black Sabbath too?
You set them up and I'll hit them at the park.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. Again, this has been episode number 5. We'll see you next time when we talk about the latest David Gilmour release. Thanks, everyone. Farewell.